This question is about how can I know for sure that the Bible is authentic? How can we say that the Bible is not false? Like, for example, in most copies, Christ bears all things by the word of his power. In Hebrew, verse 1,
Verse
1
3.
to 3, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, so you
Hebrews
know
1,
this one.
verse 3, yes.
Yeah.
No, I know what you're quoting to. So what's the objection?
Yeah, so now however, in the Codex
Vaticanus, yes.
Vaticanus, yeah, in the most copies it says Pheron, Pheron. However, in here it says Phaneron. There's a change in verb, that's it. But it makes me a little bit think, like, what if there are more things that have been changed? Because I know that the person who changed it to Phaneron, he was also criticized
So
by
now
the.
notice what you said. I want you to go back. Take it slowly. Most copies say what?
Most copies say Christ bears
Okay,
all
bears. Yeah.
things by the word of his speech.
And yet Codex
However-
Vaticanus, and I'm repeating what you're saying, 4th century, around 350, what was the word that you gave?
Christ manifests all things by the word of his power.
Now, let's go with what you just said. You just clearly made a case for the preservation of the Bible. Number one, you said most copies say Pharon. There's one copy, Codex Vaticanus, that reads differently. So two things from there. Number one, you have a single copy that you refer to, I'm going by what you said, that has a different word from the majority of copies. So now, Codex Vaticanus is a 4th century codex. It could be that the scribe misread the word before him, because in Greek, they would look quite similar, so there can be a confusion. But the very fact that this is a single variant among multiple copies that read differently, and you're only looking at the Greek. When you look into ancient versions, then it makes things even more complex, because we don't only have copies of Hebrews in Greek. We have it in Latin, we have it in Sahidic Coptic, we have it in Syriac. So then when we look at that, we can tell what the original says, because you have multiple copies, multiple locations. So the multiple location shows it is not possible for any one person to gather all the copies, or a group of individuals to gather all the copies together and corrupt them the same way, and then mass produce those corrupt manuscripts like Uthman ibn Affan did. The fact that you have multiple copies and multiple locations reading this way and a single copy that reads differently, you're arguing for the preservation of the Bible, because we look at the multiple witnesses, see where they were written, in what language, at what time frame, and when you have a higher degree of uniformity, when you have a high number of manuscripts agreeing on the reading that are written at different times, different locations, that shows you that is the original reading. So you took one variant and then assumed that because there's a variant in one copy in the 4th century, all these multiple copies in multiple centers, they're suspect. No, it's the other way around.
Yeah, guys, let me add something, because I think everyone needs to understand that point. And the reason is this is such a common misunderstanding, especially among Muslims. They'll point, Bart Ehrman says there are textual variants. That's a huge problem for Christians. So here's the point. You have the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark. At first, these are just sent out as individual books, right? Matthew sends out Matthew, Mark sends out Mark, Luke sends out Luke, John sends out John, Paul sends his letters, and so on. Christians start copying these so that Christians in other parts of the world then have access to them. But what you end up with very, very rapidly is all of a sudden you've got Christians in Europe who are copying these texts. You have Christians in Northern Africa who are copying these texts. You have Christians in the Middle East who are copying these texts and passing them on. And as Sam pointed out, then they're being translated, right? They're being translated into other languages. Not only that, you have people who are writing letters and quoting. They're quoting the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark in their letters and their writings and so on. So the idea here is, if in the 4th century or the 5th century or the 6th century, if I'm a scribe and I'm writing this down and I misread a word or I mishear a word, and there are all sorts of ways this can happen. One of the common ways is if you have the same word that's used twice in a manuscript. Lots of time, people who are copying this down page after page after page, they copy down the first one, but then their eyes go to the second occurrence of that word, and they end up copying from there. So you end up with a part missing, and so on. And so Muslims look at this and they say, "Aha! You have these textual, even though they have the same thing in the history of the Quran, even after Uthman burned all the manuscripts, they have the same thing, because that's just human beings. Human beings make this mistake. The point that they really need to get their minds around is when a scribe in the Middle East in the 5th century or the 6th century or something like that makes that mistake, guess what? The scribe in Greece doesn't make the same mistake. The scribe in Egypt doesn't make the same mistake. The scribe who's now copying a Latin manuscript doesn't make the same mistake. And a Muslim will look at that and say, you see, there's a textual variant. Bart Ehrman says there's a textual variant. This means your Bible's been corrupted. Wait a minute. Because we have so many manuscripts, because we didn't burn them all when we notice the differences, because we have so many manuscripts, it allows scholars to now line up the manuscripts and say, okay, well, we can trace this different reading here. We can trace it back to, the 5th century in this particular area. No one else has that. No one else has that anywhere else. What does that mean? It means a scribe in the 5th century made a mistake there. And guess what? We know, since everyone else has the same reading that's different from the scribe, we know what the correct reading is here, and so on.
Give me your other variant.
While you look that up, let me just bring up to Sam. Hey, Sam, for years they told us only one Quran perfectly preserved from the time of Muhammad. And then once Jay Smith and Hatun Tash started showing up to Speaker's Corner with different Arabic Qurans, then it became, yes, there are differences, but these differences complement each other. And I was just thinking, if they had a manuscript of the Quran that says upholds and another one that says manifests, they would say, yes, these were both revealed to Muhammad to complement one another on the different things that are being done here. And that's how they would explain it. Whereas we would say, yeah, a scribe messed up, right?
Yeah,
we don't have a problem with it.
And Dave, and just to confirm, before you do that, I want you, even in Surah Al-Fatiha, there are 2 readings, right? Mm-hmm. The master of the day of judgment and the king of the day of judgment, right? The owner. So they'll say, okay. Now, by the way, before you ask me another question, here's one thing I want you to remember, Ayman. Keep this in mind, because I want you to work with me as you go through the variants. Prior to the printing press and prior to all this modern technology we have, like computers and auto spell, everything was hand copied, and people would hand copy under the most difficult conditions because they didn't have lighting like we do. It is a fact of any book of antiquity, even medieval period, any book, ask anyone. I'm not even talking about religious books, just secular writings. Everything has come down to us with variant readings. Every copy, if there's more than one copy of any book of antiquity or any book of the medieval period, it has variant readings. This is true of anybody's work. You mention it, true. This is just simply the nature of copying. There is no way, unless God intervenes and inspires copyists to make perfect copies, there's no way to avoid variant readings. So whoever this gentleman is, when he's focusing on variant readings of the Bible, if he's truly consistent, he has to now be skeptical and agnostic about all ancient history or even medieval history, because everything we know from that period comes from copies that were handwritten that has variant readings. So if we follow this level of skepticism, you cannot know what happened in the past. We're going to have to be agnostic about it. So do we want to go that route? Some people are consistent and say, yeah, we don't know. All right, but go ahead.
Okay, so now this is regarding Goliath's height. So there's a verse in the Bible, chapter 1 of Psalm, verse 17:4. This is written in the Masoretic text. Okay.
Yep, which is later.
Yeah. So this talks about a champion named Goliath who was Gath. How do you pronounce it? Gath.
Gath, yeah, Gath. Yes.
Yeah. Gath came out of his Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and span. Now, this is one of the heights we see written in the Masoretic text.
Sure.
However, in the Old Testament, such as the Septuagint,
the Septuagint, the Greek versions,
Dead Sea Scrolls, they say his height is 4 cubit and a span.
So notice what you said, Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, right? You again made my case. The Masoretic copies are much later, and everything through hand copying, you're going to make mistakes, especially if you keep in mind, I want you to keep this in mind, Ayman. In Hebrew, they didn't have a number system. Letters represented numbers. So it's quite easy for a copyist to misread a letter as referring to a different number. But now you just proved to me that because the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Greek version read 4 cubits, you just told me what the original reading is, because now you have a Greek version in a language other than the original, and the most ancient copies of the Old Testament written in Hebrew before Christ, and they agree over against later Masoretic reading. So you just answered your question. The later Masoretic copies would be a defective reading because a copyist could have misread a letter for a different number. Keep that in mind. There was no number system in Hebrew. Letters represented numbers. So one letter could be confused for another, explaining a different number. But now when you tell me the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Greek say this, you just told me what the original is. So now notice, nothing is lost. The original is there as well as the variant reading, because once it enters the textual stream, it's stuck. So you just told me we have the original and it's there and we identified it. So thank you.